And I call the honourable member for Chifley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to have you here for my grievance debate. I have a lot to be aggrieved about, and I wanted to cover off some of those issues tonight. In particular, there are three issues principally that I wanted to cover off, not the least of which being one of the most important ones relating to education. When the controversial program Struggle Street aired, I was met with a variety of different reactions about that program. From the local area, there were a lot of people that were uptight about what it did in terms of reinforcing stereotype, particularly young people in the area who had, as I'd indicated previously to the House, would quite regularly not include their residential details on resumes and job applications for fear that the stigma associated with their area would prevent them from being able to take up work opportunities, which is quite wrong because Australia as a nation values that merit and skill, not the type of superficial things about where you live, that merit and skill should see you through and open up opportunity for you. So there was a lot of anger on the ground by people as to how those stereotypes were reinforced. But then outside the local area, a lot of people would say, either through social media or other contact made with me, isn't this a good thing to put a spotlight on these problems? And while on the surface it would seem like it is a good thing, and you could understand why logic would lead people to make or draw that conclusion, my concern was always it would be a short-term focus, a short-term concentration on issues of concern in our area that would disappear and leave nothing material behind. Nothing could demonstrate that more when you look at education. If you want to liberate people from Struggle Street, you need to be able to do a variety of things, not the least of which is to invest in people's capabilities and skills. And one way, the most principal way you would do that is through education. And in our area, I am genuinely concerned for the longer-term potential for people in our area to improve themselves through education. The reason I say that was reinforced on Friday when I visited the Mount Druitt campus of Chifley College. Their principal, Cathy Anderson, welcomed me with other teachers and staff at a special morning tea that was held to express the concerns of teachers and people who are at the coalface dealing with some of the social issues in our area, but also dedicated to providing a great pathway for people to improve themselves there at that school, genuinely concerned about what is the future of school funding in this country. We've already seen, regardless of the type of verbal gymnastics that are undertaken by this government, principally through the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, we have seen a $30 billion cut to the amount of money that would be dedicated to education. The amount of money that would particularly be targeted to areas of need, like areas that I represent in this place. And those cuts in our area, they translate from that $30 billion, they translate to $270 million over 10 years. And the Chifley electorate is amongst the worst that are affected, a lot of which are in Western Sydney. This is an issue that should not only be a concern for locals, but be concern for a lot of people who feel that if you are going to spend your education dollars, you would target those areas of need, you'd provide the greater support for literacy, you'd provide the greater support for teacher training, you'd provide the greater support, particularly for children who've got learning difficulties as a result of things in their background, either difficult family circumstances or the other socio-economic demographics that have been demonstrated to hold people back in education and make them at greater risk for unemployment, and not only just short-term unemployment, but the concern that I have and that we confront in our area is longer-term unemployment, that trap that sets people outside of the workplace but also inhibits their ability to fully participate in society, and that is a longer-term concern. So when I do see the type of things that are being proposed by this government within particularly the education space, after they specifically told people they were on a unity ticket, they gave every impression to people they would be there supporting education, and it's clearly evident that that's not the case, and people have been let down. And this is not just a simple breach of an election promise, this is a denial of people fulfilling their potential.
Shame.
This is a denial and an absolute shame, Member for Griffith, an absolute shame that people in my area that I know are capable and I know with a little bit of support would be able to shine, and they are being denied that through a most cynical government that is draining the trust that people have already low levels of trust in government, but are draining that into the longer term when we have heavy, serious reform that will need to be taken into the longer term, where you need to bring people and convince them on that process, and these people in government, the Abbott government, have denied it. The other area that I wanted to touch on flowing from that is the combination of the federal level of cuts being undertaken by a federal coalition and then seeing what happens at a state level. In this week, we will see a state government in New South Wales bring down a budget which is rumoured to have a hefty surplus. Now, on the face of it, a lot of people welcome a surplus, but in our area we've paid for it hard. We've already seen, I've made reference to federal cuts in education. The federal cuts in health, the $50 billion in health. We saw a report the other day in the Sydney Morning Herald on Friday that demonstrated that the people who will bear that the most are poorer people in this country. Yeah. And I represent a sizable chunk of people in lower socioeconomic circumstances in my area. We saw the state government cut, through state government cuts, we have seen Mount Druitt Hospital denied a cardiac ward, shut down in an area where heart disease kills people, which heart disease holds back people. And they've taken out, the New South Wales Coalition Government, the cardiac ward. And we'll see just a concertina effect that will occur from federal cuts and state cuts combined, and yet we have this state government boasting of a surplus while they've managed to cut services in our area. And they absolutely should be funding services targeted in our area, Member for Griffith, for the things that concern people most, particularly in terms of heart disease and the other things that inhibit people, obesity and also diabetes. All lifestyle related, require a lot of investment to get people out of that. This state government that will do a whole range of things, apparently including light rail from Homebush to Strathfield, yet people in our area cannot get the simple thing that you would expect. Train stations that had, I don't know, things like lifts in them to be able to help particularly elderly and the disabled get access to public transport. Or around that, and in Doonside and Rooty Hill, we are still waiting, and we'll be interested to see whether or not in this state budget this government funds it. They managed to find the funds, funnily enough, to help support a candidate that was running for election in the state seat of Seven Hills, and they funded the Toongabbie station upgrade, but were unable to find funds in seats that were non-held, and based on need, should have had them ages ago and haven't. And I wait to see, but I doubt very much this budget will have good news for Doonside and Rooty Hill. If they do, fantastic, but I doubt it. Healthcare, transport, and in terms of that transport as well, nothing there, for example, for improving people's access to public transport, for instance, more commuter parking around train stations. If we have federal and state coalition governments work against people by combining cuts, but they won't actually work together to make a difference in our cities. For example, making access to public transport easier. And I constantly have people at Doonside and Rooty Hill saying, if there were more, for example, facilities to park cars, I would park here and catch trains instead of clogging the M7, M2, M4 and M5, which happens across Western Sydney, and they all combine to restrict movement in that place. So they simply do not, Member for Griffith, get public transport and understand how it can actually free up movement. You can't, this is not an either-or proposition. It's not that you build public transport to the detriment of road, and it's not that you build road to the detriment of public transport. The important thing is to have a holistic approach to people movement in Sydney. And Sydney, as I've said previously, has become the Southern Hemisphere's LA. It is becoming exceedingly difficult to move around that city, and it will require governments to stump up and make the investments necessary to get people moving. People will continue to move in Sydney. There is nothing you can do about that. You can't dissuade them from it unless you make it so unlivable and so unbearable people don't choose to live there. And frankly, that is not a prescription anyone should consider is worthwhile or worthy of pursuit. So I do have concerns from that combination, as I said, from the federal and state level impacting on my area. It cannot be ignored. It is causing people to have a diminished quality of life, but as we have seen from this federal government, they will say and do anything to retain power and retain office, regardless of what impact it has on the people that I care about.
Hear, hear.